All right, we are live. Yesterday, I had a minor procedure, so I told you guys I wouldn't be live yesterday. Um, that's all fine. And then the day before that, there was an abrupt end to the live where I kind of just popped off the live and disappeared. So, what happened with that abrupt end to the live was I got a call from the United States that let me know that my father had died. So that's why the live ended, right? So I have to deal with that. Um, but it kind of sets the tone for our live today, which is on family building, generational wealth building, making sure that your family can survive tragedies based on the framework that you've set up for it, right? So we normally talk about the money side of that, right? Whether it's bond laddering that we've spoken about before, or setting up a family office and all of that stuff, right? Hey, Roland, how are you? But the most important part when it comes to building a strong family are the values and the morals that the family is kind of built upon, right? And so that you have the ability to either spearhead yourself, depending on how your family is set up, or have a family meeting and get that figured out across the family members, right? When I did it, I was in a position where I could just set it up myself, right? Because my parents were immigrants and they didn't have a lot of family around, so there wasn't a bunch of family to like sit down and have a meeting with and all of that. And so we just decided, or I just decided what kind of family I wanted, primarily based off of what kind of families I've seen and the successes of those families. And then we built out the Constitution from there, right? And so there's a lineage, interestingly enough, I happen to have a last name where almost all of us are related worldwide. So it was only like one branch of that family left about 100, maybe 150 years ago. And then the next generation is going to be the place where marriages and stuff have created a situation where we're not all related, all the people with my last name. So that was helpful as well. But there's now a line, even inside of that family, that comes, from my father down through me, where things are set apart. All right. And so where we have specific, morals, specific goals, a specific focus, right? And those focuses have to be general enough that everybody can take part without feeling as though they're being pressed in a certain direction, right? So the goal of the family can't be to be the greatest brain surgeons on the planet, right? So now every member of the family has to go to medical school and has to become a brain surgeon, and then it falls apart, right? But the goal can be to preserve and cultivate like art, right? Which is similar to some of the stated goals of like the Medici family, right? Which was also a banking family, much like the Rothschilds, right? So you'll find like Michelangelo and the Da Vinci and these people were patronized by this one family because one of their stated goals was to focus on funding the arts and funding that level of technology at the time. They didn't have the word for it at the time, but that type of technology, right? So it allowed for the individual members of the family not to have to be an artist or be bogged down into one specific thing, but understand what the goal of the family is, right? So that's important to get that squared away, and all of that happens inside a document called the Family Constitution. And the family constitution governs every aspect of the family. Now that's hard to do if you don't have professional guidance, right? Because you're not going to be able to think of everything that might happen with the family that hasn't happened yet, or perhaps has happened and hasn't been talked about yet, right? Which is worse. That means it's never been resolved. So those things, you might not be able to anticipate what they might be, right? So that's why you'll want to work with typically some kind of estate planner will typically be the right person to work with, some type of professional in that range would be the right person to work with, who can break down like, okay, what happens when cousin Steve becomes a drug addict? How do we handle that? What happens when Auntie Lucy becomes an alcoholic? How do we handle that? Right? What happens when Bobby steals his brother's wife? How do we handle that? Right? So it has to be somebody who has kind of been through this, who understands the dynamics of interpersonal relationships, understands interfamily dynamics, and can create a document that essentially turns the family into an unbiased machine, right? So that unbiased machine has to be able to treat all family members fairly, essentially like under the law, like under the family law, right? And then you go forward from that. It allows family to be more open. And this is like the feedback that we get from a lot of our clients. It allows family to be more open because they understand, not necessarily the punishment, they understand the accountability that they'll have to take, right? And they understand that no one's going to, do too much and go overboard because their favorite nephew or their favorite niece is involved or anything like that, that the standards are set in stone and that it's incredibly obvious to everyone involved if someone tries to manipulate those standards, right? So under like a governmental legal systems only work when there's surety of punishment. If the system that you're utilizing to create law and order does not have surety of punishment, it doesn't work. And the punishment has to be severe enough to deter whatever behavior it is you're trying to deter, right? So the same has to be true within the family. Typically, those things become censorship, right? Because families aren't locking each other up or sending each other to prison or anything like that. So it becomes a form of censorship, which is why the head of the family typically controls how family assets get distributed, right? And so that's where you run into situations where, as a beneficiary of, like, say, a family trust, sure, you benefit from it, but the trustee controls it, not the beneficiary, right? So that's how people can, even though they're in the family and maybe they qualify to be part of the trust and all of that, they can be cut off because they're not the trustee, right? And so those older generations of the family end up, running and managing the family assets, and then censorship becomes the number one kind of accountability metric within the family, right? So your allowance is going to get cut, your access to whatever is going to get cut. The same types of things that families do anyway, but in an unbiased and fair structure where people, they accept accountability because they know they're getting, the fair and unbiased, punishment, so to speak, that anybody else would get. It also goes the opposite way, right? So any rewards would also be fair and unbiased because they'd be governed by the Constitution, right? So they'd be getting the same rewards that anyone else in the family who did something similar would get, right? So that's important too. You want to make sure that it's balanced and that it fits your family specifically. There are typically crown jewels, right? So there are typically crown jewels. The crown jewels represent the power and the authority of the family, and are typically things that everybody wants, right? So there might be, a house in a specific place, right? Like for us, it might be a house in Lansapine, Grenada, on the beach, right? This iconic beach house that represents the family, and the person who lives there is the person who's running the family, right? Okay. There might be an art collection, right? Depending on what the family is into. There's actually a very strong art focused family that we've done their family constitution for, and that's the family crown jewels, or these this art collection that keeps getting bigger and more valuable, by the way. But this art collection is like the crown jewel, and so whoever has control of the art collection is the person who's running the family, right? And so there are these things that would be in place. There are these symbols and totems and even traditions that would present themselves that become part of the fabric of the family. These things glue the family together. They're not to be overlooked, right? So the traditions, whatever they might be, the holidays, there should be holidays that only exist in your family. All of those things bring the family together. It's the same thing as being part of a sorority or a fraternity. There are things within those groups that only the members of those groups are aware of, and that only means something to the members of those groups. All right, that creates the fidelity, that creates the sisterhood, that creates the brotherhood, and in this case, that creates the family structure that allows that family to essentially be unstoppable. You'll never beat an organized family. It'll never happen, right? They're way too powerful. There's too many people all focused on the same goal, all leveraging their networks, for an individual to effectively combat. I mean, that's part of the issue with the kind of U.S. business system, is that when you engage as an individual, you're automatically at a disadvantage, right? So powerful families will always beat talented individuals, right? That's not even to mention untalented individuals, right? So the creating that family is important. Having it in writing is important. All of the monetary stuff can come secondary to that, quite frankly, right? So creating the family constitution, knowing exactly what you want, either your line of the family, if it's just you and your direct kids, and you're not involving cousins and stuff like that. If it's just your direct line of the family, knowing what they stand for, knowing what direction that they're going in, and making sure that that gets passed down generation to generation is step number one. That's a step that's overlooked all the time. From there, the family constitution normally informs the family trust deed, right? So if you have a family constitution, I can create a family trust for you in like 30 minutes, right? So if there's a legitimate family constitution in place, the family constitution normally informs the family trust deed. Okay, and then you can start getting into money and going ahead and building wealth over generations and all of that great stuff. All right, that's fine, but it starts with that foundational document. If you don't have the foundational document, what'll happen is somebody's going to do something. No one's going to know how to deal with it. Everybody's going to fight against each other. The whole family is going to get broken up, and that's going to be the end of that. All right. Solid families that operate from a family constitution basis cannot be turned on each other. It's virtually impossible. Right. So they can have their own little beefs with each other and all that, but they know how to solve it. So those beefs become optional, because there should be a conflict resolution article in the Constitution that tells you exactly how to deal with that conflict, and it doesn't matter what it is. We've had families that are building, their legacy, where one brother slept with the other brother's wife. Typically, that would tear a family apart, because half the family would be on brother A's side, the other half the family would be on brother B's side, or they'd be cut into fourths. 1/4 of the family would think the wife, was a 304. The other family would think, oh no, she was drinking and the brother took advantage, and so there'd be this huge divide, and everybody would be at everybody's throat, and everybody would take a side and draw a line in the sand, and the family would be destroyed, right? Not if you have a constitution. They went right to the Constitution. They went right to the conflict resolution. It was all impartial. The punishments that needed to be handed out were handed out. You were wrong. You were right. It was set in stone. and the entire family was able to move on. And they ended up coming back to us at one of our annual meetings and said, if it wasn't for the family constitution framework, that would have destroyed the family completely, right? And so that's what happens when there's a foundational place where everybody can reset at the foundation of what it means to be in this family and then move forward from there, right? Again, you don't want it to be too tight. So you don't want it to be, our family is about being the best doctors in the world. Well, now you got a problem, because what happens when little Tommy is just a natural engineer and medical school is not going to work for him, right? So you don't want it to be like that. You want it to be whatever your family is. So it can be that your family is, focused on, trying to think of one of the weirdest ones. Oh, we had one a few years ago that onboarded that the one of the things that the family focuses on as a goal was horticulture and agriculture, right? Well, that can be a hobby, right? So they have in all of their trust estates, which we built two of their trust estates for them. They have these incredible gardens, and sometimes it's just the structure. Sometimes it's just like the landscaping that's incredible for now, right? And there's space to improve the garden, right? I'm literally onboarding a young lady right now who's relocating with her son, and she wants a small little house, a house that can fit on an eighth of an acre, maybe even a 16th of an acre. Nothing major. It's just her and her 3-year-old, right? But she's also building out her family, and she also has this kind of nature conservation type of situation with her. So her estate is being built out with this little 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom house that she wants. But beyond that, there's an entire acre of like trees that are being built around this estate, and there's specific trees that are being built, and those specific trees mean specific things to her and her family. And so she's starting that first botanical garden of her family, and that botanical garden is going to mean something for generations to come, and family reunions are going to happen there, and things are going to happen there. And so it's about that kind of vision where if you're the one who's creating the foundation and the framework for the family, you have to have that vision of what you want the family to be and then execute from there. What are the oddest? What are the oddest family goals? Is that what you mean? Or are you talking about like what are the oddest trees? I don't remember all the trees off the top of my head. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. My dad died 2 days ago. So that's why I ended the live abruptly 2 days ago. Yeah. But thank you. I appreciate that. What are the oddest family goals? Interesting. What are the oddest family goals? I mean, the horticulture, agriculture thing struck me as odd when it happened. Now that I see what they've, created, it's not odd anymore. That typically that's what it is. When you can't see their vision, it seems odd until you can see their vision. Then it's like, oh, this is really cool. So that's typically what it is. Why does it need to be done abroad? Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be done abroad. The strength in doing it abroad is that no one can take it from you. So if you're in a litigious country, there are some countries that are not very litigious at all, right? That this country actually being one of them, Kenya. But there are some countries that are not litigious, and there are some countries that are incredibly litigious, right? So in incredibly litigious countries like America, then what can end up happening is while you're building something, an unrelated incident can take place that has nothing to do with what you're building, has nothing to do with your business, has nothing to do with your family goals, and yet it destroys all of those things, right? The most common in the U.S., at least in our experience with our clients, the most common thing is a car accident. Most common thing, right? So we're from the Northeast, originally from like the Philadelphia area. And so it snows and we get what's called black ice, right? I know not everybody has heard of that term, but essentially what it is it's raining in the middle of winter. and then it becomes nighttime, and that rain creates a thin sheet of ice on the macadam of the road. So the rain, that ice is black, the same as the road, so you can't see it. And you hit that ice, and your car spins out of control, and it can hit anything and fly off the road, and all of that stuff, right? So something like that happens. It's not your fault per se, right? You were taking all due care. You might have been driving slow enough and all of that stuff, but now you've slid off the road into someone else's car. They sue you because it's a litigious country. They don't call you and they're like, "Hey, how can we work this out? Can you repair my car? Can you?" That's not what happens. They sue you, and so now you lose the lawsuit. And if your stuff isn't offshore, it's up for grabs. And even if it is offshore, it could be up for grabs if you technically own it. So the reason why most of our clients do offshore trusts is so that not only is it offshore and out of the way of the local jurisdiction that they're living in, but they don't legally own it. The trust does. So then those things that they're trying to build for future generations are secure. So you don't have to do it offshore. Offshore just adds a certain level of protection to it. How does conflict resolution articulate work? Oh, the article of conflict. Okay. So your conflict resolution strategy will be designed for your family, right? And there are many different ways of doing it. Sometimes people will even bring in like an interpersonal relationships expert, which is typically a sociologist. So sometimes people will go ahead and bring one in. You'd be surprised how affordable that type of stuff is. Like it sounds crazy, sounds like, oh yeah, you're bringing in a sociologist to help you write, blah 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 blah. But you'd be surprised, if you offer a professor, you know, $50 for 2 hours, to sit down and explain conflict resolution to you. How many of them will just say yes? Or paying somebody for the day, $200 for the day or something like that, for them to come in and just explain how conflict resolution works. Because here's the thing, within the family, and we've actually seen this for marriages as well. I've actually applied it in my own marriage quite often. But within the family, there are certain positions that nobody really wants to occupy, right? And so what do I mean by that? I mean, even if you're the patriarch and the matriarch, right? If every time there's a conflict of vision, right? Not necessarily a conflict of fact, just a conflict of direction or a conflict of vision. If every time that happens, your vision is correct and everyone else's vision is incorrect, okay? Then that means that you're the only one with vision and everyone else has no vision. 100% of the time, right? The smartest people are not right 100% of the time, right? So now we're creating this situation where there's one person who's right all the time, which is obviously a lie, and no one else is ever right. Or, one person wins every argument and no one else ever wins an argument. What does that mean? That means you have a family full of losers. That means that in your family, only one person wins and everyone else is a loser. You have a loser family, right? You don't want that, right? Same thing in a marriage. If the husband wins every argument or if the wife wins every argument, that means their spouse is a loser, right? That's not something that you want in a spouse, right? So that's where this idea of having like an interpersonal relationship expert come in and explain that. Like, wait a minute. Like, I know you get caught up in the heat of the argument and you're right and you're wrong and I'm going to win. But if you're always winning, that means the other person's always losing. Now you've weakened your own team, right? So when they're drafting those conflict resolution articles, it's really important that they're unbiased, and it's really important that there's an expert there who can point those types of things out to you that you may have never even thought about before. right? And we see that a lot. Like we see somebody coming in and they're like, all right, we want to build out our family constitution. We're ready to start our dynasty. And by the time of we're done with the family constitution process, it's like they've had like marriage counseling. It's like all their relationships have just gotten better because they're like, oh yeah, I kind of do that. Oh yeah, right. So you want a family full of winners, right? So that means that they got to win some of the arguments. You want a family full of visionaries. That means that their vision has to be right sometimes, right? And so when you look at things, you have to look at things objectively, and that has to be built into your your family constitution, so that future generations start with objectivity, right? Like that's one of the side effects of like the U.S. Constitution. People are born and they think they have the right to speak. They think they have the right to free speech, to the point where they go somewhere else where the United States Constitution doesn't apply at all and talk about, oh, my freedom of speech. That doesn't exist everywhere, right? But they're born with it. It's a norm to them. They keep it moving with that in mind everywhere they go, right? So if you can create a family constitution that allows your future generations to be born thinking that they have freedom of vision, thinking that they have the freedom to win financially, the freedom to win in business. And it's just like the arrogant American, my freedom of speech, you can't stop me from speech, and which is not true, maybe where they are, but it's ingrained in them because it's part of their constitution, it's part of what they were born with, right? So that's what you want for your family. You want them to have, yep, I can win. Yep, I can sit at any table, right? I deserve to be at any table. I deserve to win in business. I deserve to win in life. All of those things need to be there, and that needs to be part of what they call their modus operandi, the way that they work, right? The way that they think, where they don't even question it. It just is what it is, right? So that's where that family constitution comes in. Hey, Chris, how are you? Nice to meet you, Chris. I'm John. Oh, thanks for the subscription. Right. So that's why though, because a lot of times it's like, why do I need a professional for this? Why do I need a professional for that? Trust me, you do. Trust me, you do. A bunch of y'all are in relationships and marriages, and I just got done talking about being with a loser if you're winning all the fights, and that just clicked for you, and you had never thought about it before. I guarantee it. I've been doing this for over a decade. So I know what just happened when I said that, right? So that's where the expert comes in. You know what I mean? To open your eyes to things that you have maybe never heard of, maybe that you have never thought of in regards to building that family, right? What are we talking about? Today, we happen to be talking about generational wealth through building family dynasties. Yeah. I don't typically go this deep into this subject, but the last time we were live, I ended the live abruptly because I got a phone call that my father had died. And the family was, able to do what needed to be done very quickly and get everything situated. However, it dawned on me that we really only able to respond so quickly because there's a solid, basis within the family of what should be done and what everybody's place is and how we move forward and all of that stuff. And we have a blended family, right? There's another family, and they work just as effectively, right? My mother had passed years ago, and my dad remarried, so there's that family too, and they're just as effective as our family because they also have a basis. I think that also happens when you start building families that are intentional. They start marrying into other families that are intentional, right? And so because to a certain extent, winners are attracted to each other, right? When you look at Olympics, you look at sporting events, you look at these, like winners are attracted to each other. They want to play for the same team, right? And so once you instill in your family, this is the vibe, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what we're worth, and those things are there, you'll start attracting other people that are like that. All right, Chris, enjoy yourself. Right. So that's where it is. That's where it is. Family Dynasty building, learn about conflict resolution. Yeah. Conflict resolution. The conflict resolution part of your family constitution is probably the most important part. Over the experience that we have with family constitutions, that's probably the most important part of the family constitution is the conflict resolution part. What's second most important? Financial literacy. Do you really need it if you're a single parent? Well, I mean, you're a parent, so yeah. Because here's what you don't want, probably, right? If we're being honest, I know a lot of times we bang on our chest and say whatever sounds good in the moment. But if we're being honest, we probably don't want our child to be a single parent as well, right? And so we want some kind of change in circumstances. And I know outwardly it's the other person's fault and they're this and they're that. And, you know, what if they could only have been this, then I wouldn't be single. And I get it. But there's always some accountability on us, right? I've been there, not necessarily as a single parent, but I've been there where it's all her, you know what I mean? And then we grow up a little bit and we realize like, oh, wait a minute, I have some accountability, right? So by creating a structure where our descendants take accountability, they recognize that and don't have to go through that. It's all them. It's not me. I was perfect. They messed up. They did the thing that broke us, whatever, and not look at what I did previous to that, you know, occurring and blah, 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 blah. By not shaping that ability, we almost set them down the same path. Right. And oftentimes our children end up in similar situations to us. Right. It's just the way it kind of works out. And so oddly enough, I was having this discussion in a family constitution workshop. And I said that and someone was brave enough to like raise their hand. We typically do it in like a Zoom setting. So you can raise your hand and like whatever. And so like I was like, yeah, go ahead, you know. And she said, you know what? I had a baby at 14. My daughter had a baby at 14. And now her daughter has had a baby at 14. So all those generations were alive because of how young they had their babies. And so they were all single moms who had their first baby at 14. Right. And so it hit her when I said that, like, hey, if you don't change, you know, your circumstances, a lot of times our kids follow up and they have very similar circumstances to us. And, you know, she went in and really broke down what all that was about and how all that worked out for her. And that was actually part of the reason why she was in the family constitution workshop. And so that's how you break the cycle, because typically they have to see it. You can tell them anything you want to tell them, but they have to see it and they have to see it consistently. And that's how you end up breaking that cycle. So you can see like somebody might have been, I don't know, a banger. Right? Like they were involved in organized crime as a child, right? So they were running the streets, doing that as a child. And then maybe they got like super religious, right? And so by the time their children are born, they're a pastor. Their kids don't end up being, you know, street thugs, because what they see is the new standard, not the old standard. So a change was made, right? There wasn't necessarily a family constitution per se, but they created a foundation of morality based on something else and then emulated that every day. Every day those kids saw that new standard of this is what this family does, right? And then they emulated that and they didn't, you know, follow in the footsteps of, you know, that, you know, father who might have been part of whatever organization, right? And then they're shocked when they find out, like when they're adults and they find out like, oh, you were blue or you were red or you were purple, you know, whatever it was, like, wow, I can't believe that. And they're flabbergasted. And then by that time they're old enough that knowing doesn't affect what they do, right? So that's what the family constitution does, but it does it permanently. Because that decision that they made to maybe become a pastor or whatever, that's a temporary decision. Right? The next generation might not even know grandpa was a pastor. Right? And now there's a new set of circumstances that they're learning as they grow up and figuring out, and then that's where peer pressure sets in and all of these things kind of set in the absence of structure. Right? That's why military schools work so much. because you can send your child to a place that has structure, and then that structure will fill in the gaps, right? And then they'll make friends within that structure and go from there. That's why boarding schools exist and these types of things, right? So you can make a decision and say, all right, listen, I'm going to build this family the way I want this family built. I'm going to structure it the way I want it structured. I'm going to memorialize that in a writing. I'm going to make sure that every generation is taught that. And typically, there's like, well, what's the incentive to carry that on, right? Well, there's two. One incentive might be your success. So seeing that you succeed is typically a half decent incentive for the rest of the family to do it. So that's the first incentive. The second incentive is typically the family trust, right? So if you're not particularly successful, which happens a lot with progenitors, right? So the first generation of the family is typically always the successful one, right? The first Rothschild was a cobbler. He repaired shoes and he could he couldn't read, but he could count. Right? But they don't call him the first one. They call his son the first one. Right? But he's the one who set everything up. But he died poor, as he built, just the slightest amount of extra wealth to send his son to school. And then his son got, a formal education and built the empire. But he's the one who set the foundation, right? He's the progenitor of that family, right? So what ends up happening is if you have the family trust, you can set it up where they have to learn the basics of whatever it is you need them, to learn to be eligible for the trust. So that's the secondary incentive to getting it done. So personal success is your primary incentive, and then your secondary incentive would be that you have a family trust compounding, which you don't have to have a ton of money to do, as we've talked about in the past. You can set that up with any amount of money, quite frankly. The most important thing is time for compounding. And so then by the time it's their turn, that small amount of money that you might have put aside has compounded into something significant, which is what you want. Right? Even we've only been doing this for about 12 years. And even in those 12 years, we've seen people put, $10,000 in to a generational wealth trust. And now 12 years later, that $10,000 is almost $1 million in just 12 years. So that's because they started with a large amount and they had favorable terms. So there's that. But that's how compounding works. Just the longer it compounds, the more money you end up with. And mind you, that means that they went through COVID, right? And the market, crashed, and they lost some money in that crash, but they never actualized it. They never took the money out. They just left it there, right? So it went down, came back up, went down, came back up. So they had gone through, I think, three. Let me think. I feel like they went through three. I think we were coming out of the 2008 mortgage subprime crisis when they started. They started somewhere around 2010, 2011, set up the actual trust. I believe it was 2014, but they had done all their other pre-work before that, and then just let it ride, and they never added more money to it. So it just depends on time. Time is, we talk about that all the time. Time is the factor that changes everything. So you let things compound over time in order to build generational wealth that's removed from your need to succeed in anything or, become anything great or anything like that. But I'll tell you what, by setting up a dynasty style family, right? For me, your household is treated like a business, which keeps everything in check, right? So there's a household budget, there's a profit and loss statement, there's quarterly and annual reports, there's a staff, right? And sometimes going abroad is what makes the staff work, right? Like I have a full household staff, would cost me, I don't know, $500,000, $1 million a year in the U.S. And it cost me maybe $15,000 a year here, right? So sometimes, to get your staff in place and start moving, that's also part of your relocation and having your passport portfolio plan going so that you can move in between, these different countries as a citizen. But having that structure allows you to react to things, like my father's death, right? I was on a live when it happened. I was talking to you guys when I got the call, 2 days ago, right? So, but if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you have no structure, there's nothing set up, there is no budget, you're just willy-nillying everything. When something like that happens, it's devastating because there is no reserve. There is no, backup. There is no ad hoc account, that you can access to make things happen. So, even for you in the short term, building the discipline is quite helpful. It's more and more and more and more beneficial for each generation. Definitely more beneficial to your grandkids than it's going to be to you, right? Absolutely, 100%. But even in the short term, gaining the discipline will still have a positive effect on your life. So that's how our generational wealth clients build in that generational wealth through offshore trusts and through their family constitutions. All right. Any questions on that? Any questions on that? I know I haven't been live long today, but I am still dealing with that family tragedy. So, but the discipline and the consistency are there. So I'm still here. How do you prepare your child to continue the generational wealth? That's part of the education. That's actually the number one purpose of the family constitution. In the family constitution, it'll break down what kind of education is necessary, and then the family trust pays for it, right? So then, in that family trust document, it'll say 5%, of the profits of the family trust are to be used for financial literacy education of the beneficiaries, right? And so then your trustee, which we talked about before, is typically a professional trustee company that has lawyers in it, right? The trustee would then organize that. They have to by law, right? And so they would get in. We've seen it. There's one family that has their annual meeting, which is also the family reunion, right? So they have their annual meeting every year in the Maldives. No, I'm sorry, not the Maldives. Mauritius, in Mauritius. They have their family meeting every year in Mauritius. And part of that meeting, they actually fly out like Harvard professors and all of that. Like they don't do the tenured ones. It's typically the ones that are like waiting for tenure. So like the ones that are like struggling, but they're still Harvard professors. And so like they offer them like, hey, you want a weekend in Mauritius, you and your family, you have to teach our kids a 4-hour class on financial literacy. So they'll get like a Harvard MBA professor to come teach their kids financial literacy, or some guy from Oxford, to come teach whatever it is they want taught. And they'll do that like every year, at the family reunions, and there's a cap on it. Like that can only be 10% of the profits or 5% of the profits of the trust. And so the trust can't do that at first, but eventually through compounding, it'll gain the ability where it's making. So like, for example, that family from 12 years ago, currently they started with 10,000. Currently, they're doing something like 25,000 a year on average, because it takes about 4 years for their money to double, right? So they're doing like 25,000 a year on average, right? And then in 4 years, then that's going to change to 50,000 a year. And then 4 years after that, it's going to be 100,000 a year. And then 4 years after that, it's going to be 200. See how the compounding works? So it's going to get to the point where you can put a Harvard professor on a private jet and fly them out for the weekend to teach your children personally, right? And then what does that do for your network? Right. Stanford is where most VC firms were born and where most of the owners, children, and all that go to. So you go to Stanford, you're almost guaranteed venture capital funding, right? By the current regime of venture capitalists, right? So what does it mean to your family and your kids if you can fly out a finance professor from Stanford for a weekend and just take care of everything for them? Which, why would they say no to that, right? So you take them out, treat them, in the Maldives or wherever it is you're having whatever, family meeting you're having every year, and you teach the kids financial literacy. You teach them venture capital. You teach them finance, period. You teach them about world economy. You teach them about market systems, blah, 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 blah. What does that do to their network? Even if they haven't gone to Stanford, right? Now they're very in touch with Stanford professors. Even if they haven't gone to Harvard, but you want a Harvard law professor to teach them, international law over the family reunion. What has that done to their network now? Right? Something that you couldn't do because you're not connected to these people, right? But now they are, whether they go to Harvard or go to Stanford or not. So they're now connected to that world, and they feel like they have a seat at the table because of what you've created for them. So it's one of those things where, like, do you believe that as a parent you're supposed to give your child the best chance in life possible? Is that a belief that resonates with you? I've met people who that doesn't resonate with them. I remember there was a girl, what was her name? Wendy. There was a girl named Wendy from Trinidad. And I remember her saying, in a meeting, I don't want my kids to have anything better than me. I want to have the best. I don't want my kids to have anything better than me. All right, this is not for you. So not everybody resonates with that statement. But if you resonate with that statement, then it becomes okay, obviously I'm going to set this stuff up. Obviously, I'm going to put my kids in position. Obviously, I'm going to make sure they have access. And if I can't make sure my kids have access, I'm going to make sure my grandkids have access. Like this is obvious stuff. It's just a matter of knowing how to do it. You know what I mean? Once I know how to do it, it's obvious that I'm going to execute on that if that's my belief system, right? So the difference in those belief systems are literally the difference in the class systems across the world, right? So people with certain belief systems always find themselves in the top 10%. And there's always been a top 10%. You go ahead and look back through history, ask ChatGPT, go on Wikipedia, do whatever you want to do. It's always been the exact same percentage in every system. Doesn't matter. Capitalism, socialism, market economies, imperial economy. Doesn't matter. None of that matters. They're just excuses, right? Back as far as you can go. Even in African systems where they use glass beads, you can go back and look at the Benin economic system where they traded in glass beads, and there was no capitalism, and it wasn't even socialism, and it was what they call a marketplace economy, right? The different type of economy, similar to what China has actually. Still top 10%, bottom 50%, and the middle class in between. Doesn't matter. Right, all of the excuses that people use are just that. Just it's capitalism bad. It's socialism bad. It's communism bad. They're all bad. They all do the same thing. It's people, and what that person's focus is, what their belief system is, what they believe they deserve. That's what puts them in position. And if you can figure out how to make sure that your kids are in the best position, and you believe that it's your responsibility as a parent to make sure that your kids do have the best, then it's an easy choice. Does that kind of bring it into perspective? Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is. Interestingly enough, uh, President Obama had mentioned something similar, where he was going around saying that he had met, all these business moguls and these top leaders and all that. And when you get in a room with them, they're not really nothing special. They just feel like they deserve to have a seat at the table, and that really is all it is. As you start, we do some asset protection through the law firm. So asset protection, I mean, if you don't have $10 million in assets, it doesn't make sense, right, to do it. You'd be paying more for asset protection than the protection you'd be getting. So you would need to have essentially at least 10 million in assets, depending on what the asset is, maybe 1 million, right? So you're dealing with those kinds of people if you do like asset protection stuff. And President Obama's absolutely right. The amount of those people that are essentially nothing special, they just feel like they deserve a seat at that table, and that's it. It would probably make your head spin. The amount of those people that you might be smarter than, would make your head spin because your intelligence is not going to have any direct impact on your success. Right? Most inventors, which you have to be, arguably intelligent to invent a new technology that no one's ever invented before, right? Most inventors die penniless. Their inventions aren't even used during their lifetime. They're typically used much, much later by someone who's much less intelligent. Benjamin Franklin and Nikola Tesla would be a really great example of that. Well, that's the $1 million question, right? So, for you guys on the other two apps, Baraki was saying, so how do you know where to start? And that is the only hard part is knowing where to start. Basically, what it boils down to is for some reason. Now, this doesn't happen in China. I lived in China for a couple of years. I just got back from China last month. I like the way China operates because they understand that you have to hire people to understand and have access to the things that you don't know. For us, unfortunately, we have this thing on our shoulders where we don't want to hire people. It's like we want to know it all. And like if we hire somebody, it proves that we don't know it all, right? So that's the answer. You need to hire a professional, right? When you want something done, you need to hire a professional, right? It's typically pretty easy to vet a professional. Okay. So when people are like, well, how do I know if they're a professional? Now you're an excuse maker. That's not a valid question, right? It's typically very, very easy to vet professionals because there are what? Professional organizations, right? There's the National Association of Realtors, right? If you want to vet a realtor, then you can go to the National Association of Realtors and vet them. If you want to vet a lawyer, there's something called the bar. You can go to the bar association, just walk right in the door and say, hey, I'm thinking about working with so-and-so. Are they a member of the bar? Are they a legitimate lawyer? Like you can vet people for free quite easily, right? So make sure that you get your professionals together, and that's the answer. Because you don't know what you don't know. That's what professionals are for. You don't know what you don't know. That's why you go to a doctor. And that's why even doctors will send you to specialists, right? You go to your general doctor and he says, that looks like a tumor. He doesn't deal with it. He sends you to a specialist. And the specialist who deals only in tumors deals with it, right? And this is somebody who went to school for 16 years to be who he is and knows more about your body than you do as far as anatomy is concerned, not how it feels, right? And he's still sending you to an additional specialist who specializes in whatever he found or whatever he sees, right? So we all know that that's the way you're supposed to do it. And for some reason, we just don't do that, or we don't value that. And so that's why the vast majority of us slip through the cracks. And that's why it's also very, very interesting in China, because the vast majority of them have been entrepreneurs at some point in time because of the way they do things. They all come together and they all typically raise funds through classmates. And it's something that is expected over there. So the classmates stick together like forever. It's really interesting because if you ask married couples how they met each other, 9 times out of 10, they'll say we were classmates. And then every time someone from their class has like a business idea, they all come together and they all support. And they support it in the sense of like, all right, we're not getting this back. Like this business is going to fail. Like they understand statistics. They're not idiots, right? And so they know like, all right, most of the businesses aren't going to work out. But, let's go ahead and do this because this might be the one that does work out. And even if it doesn't, they're supposed to gain important insights and supposed to gain important information that helps them win the next one, right? So that's the way that's supposed to work out. And they get it. And they operate that way. And it strengthens their network because even if that friend has a failed business, they know bankers, they know VCs, they know supply chain people. Like they took a solid attempt at a real business and they gained network from that. And now that network is available to the entire classmate circle. So it still makes the entire circle stronger because they can see what real value is. Real value isn't always currency in your bank account. It's typically information and networks. If you got the right network and you have access to the right information, then money will just come. That's not, if you're chasing money, good luck. So that's the way typically those things, really work. And if you have an understanding and a grasp on that and you engage with that, then great. If you don't, though, you typically end up making a lot of excuses as to why things aren't working, without looking at the one person who's responsible for why things aren't working, which is the person in the mirror. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I think that's kind of the beauty of some of the social media stuff. I think we saw this like in places like Clubhouse as well, where people can admit when they're not like directly in the public eye under public scrutiny, they can admit where their shortcomings are. The issue is a lot of it becomes mental masturbation. A lot of it becomes like, oh, I can go through this process and I can go through, the system and listen to this person and hear the feedback and recognize, what I need to do to change. And now that I know, I feel good, and that's it. Masturbation over, and then they do nothing. Right? And so that becomes the problem, is when it's just all talk and all mental masturbation and there's no action. Action has to happen. Yeah. Moving to Zambia, Africa's best kept secret. I'm not sure how secret it is, Lilo, but congratulations on moving to Zambia. How do you decide which country to go through? Okay, so Baraki, that's a great question. You have to work backwards from your goals. We absolutely positively never suggest that you go somewhere based on vibes. That doesn't work out. Unfortunately, look at the folks in Tanzania right now, right? So we used to get a lot of people call us and like, does your law firm help people relocate to Tanzania as well? We don't. We only work with Kenya. And now a lot of those people went to Tanzania to open businesses, to add economic activity, to hire, people who look like them, and all the great things that people want to do so often. And Tanzania dropped the law. Oop, you're a foreigner. You're not allowed to own these businesses. What? You know what I mean? Like, and so then that became the issue for them. So now they're stuck there, but they did it off of vibes, right? It wasn't, oh, this is a really great business environment for us. It was, oh man, I really like the way it feels in Tanzania. And now you're stuck in a situation where you can't, support your family, you can't support anything because you thought the vibes were going to carry you through. So we never ever recommend that. We also don't recommend like DNA test stuff, because typically that doesn't add up anyway. I'll give you a personal example actually. In my haplogroup test connects me on my father's side to a group called Balanta in Guinea-Bissau, right? And so if I were going to take a test and move to a country, ooh, I'm going to Guinea-Bissau, that's where my people are. When you study the history of the Balanta, they actually come from the border of modern day Sudan and Egypt. They were nomadic people. And when Europeans put countries on top of Africa, they happened to be in their nomadic journey over there in Guinea Bissau. So Guinea Bissau is fake, right? Same as Nigeria, same as almost every country in Africa except Ethiopia, right? They didn't exist when our people roamed free. They were things that Europeans created. So to take a blood test and be like, oh, look, Nigerian, I'm going to Nigeria, that doesn't make sense, right? So that's also something that we typically never recommend. So typically it's based on what your goals are and then how you want to execute those goals in that country, and then go from there. Yeah, no, and well, we send people away all the time because their goals don't necessarily, not that they don't, not that they're incompatible with Kenya, but Kenya's not the best place, right? So the last people we ended up sending them to South Africa because they want to do an IP firm. South Africa, bar none, has the best IP laws on the entire continent. By by and far, bar none, the best. Just because we're in Kenya doesn't mean that we're going to lie about it, right? So it just matters you finding your people and figuring out what it is that you want, and then going backwards from there. All right. What did I miss here? How are barbers in Kenya? I don't know. I don't really. I'm not one of those. I know. I got friends like that, that are all about the outward appearance and all of that. I don't have like a set barber. I'm not a barbershop guy, so, but I get it. I got a lot of friends who are coming from Philly and all of that, go spend half a day in the barbershop politicking and all of that. I don't have time for that. I'd rather be in the bank while they're in the barbershop. Yeah, okay. So if you're for as far as the vetting tips go, if you're doing it in the other country, right? Then you can go typically to your embassy. Your embassy will typically give you a list of professionals that they use. So if you're worried about like getting scammed or you're worried about whatever, the embassy will typically give you a list of professionals they use. No matter what you're doing, your little check don't mean nothing to the check that the embassy is giving them. So when they know that you're coming from the embassy, and if they mess you up, they're gonna lose that big embassy business. They are on their best behavior. So that's one of those ways to kind of break through foreign vetting. There are countries that suck at having vetting available. Typically, every professional in Kenya, for example, there's an online database, and you just go online and look them up, and you'll see their entire license information and all of that. So Kenya's pretty good at allowing people to be vetted, but not every country is that good. So in that regard, you would go to the embassy either in your country or go to your embassy in their country, one or the other. And then you can get a list of the vendors that they deal with typically, right? Especially if you're American. And maybe there's some countries where they won't give out the vendor list or something like that. I don't know. But Americans, you go to what's called the American Center in the embassy or consulate. And then from there, you just contact the people on that list. So not particularly difficult. I have no idea. That's a great question. I have no idea why why Facebook is so much darker than the rest. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We work with quite a few people who establish NGOs. There's an NGO permit. So for people who establish NGOs, there's a specific permit that allows them to come over here. So we deal with that quite a bit. We're actually working with an NGO now that has well, they're taking over a orphanage. Yeah, so you might see some stuff about that on this page because I know they're looking to do like a Christmas camp for the orphans and all of that. So you might see us share that information for people to throw some donations their way. Real cool organization though. And I know like where they're taking it over from. I know they have like a whole like renovation thing that they're looking to do because I think the kids like there were like bed bugs and all kinds of stuff. So they they took it over from some Europeans that weren't doing the best stewardship. So the kids were suffering quite a bit, and so they got to get rid of the bed bugs. They burn all the beds. The only way to get rid of bed bug eggs is to raise the temperature to a certain place and then leave it at a certain heat for a certain amount of time. So they're pulling everybody out, doing this like Christmas camp situation, and then having that heat treatment into all of the, living spaces and all of that, and doing renovations and all of that. So bringing it up to, the standards that we would like to see for children. So great group, actually. Ooh. If you have, I see you removed a message there. If you have something, or if you wrote something, I didn't see it. It's because there's three of you guys, right? So this is YouTube, this is TikTok, this is Facebook. So if I'm not looking in your direction, then I'm not necessarily seeing your comments. So just give me a minute or ask again. Absolutely not. Nope. So your wealth plan and the generational wealth plan are two separate plans. So if your generational wealth plan is that you're going to become, filthy rich, and then your kids are going to inherit that, there's a greater than 75% chance of failure, and that's not a generational wealth plan at all. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have that plan, you shouldn't go after it, but that is your personal plan. That is not a generational wealth plan. Well, generational wealth is easy. So that thing that you're talking about doing is hard, right? Generational wealth is retardedly easy, right? All you got to do is put money away and let it compound. Literally, that's all you have to do, right? So it's so stupid easy to build generational wealth that it's absurd that everyone doesn't do it. And to a certain extent, at least in America, everyone kind of does. It's just not slated for generational wealth, right? So like the vast majority of people have some kind of 401k that's forced on them by an employer or something like that, even if they're not contributing a lot to it, right? That concept of this money is going to sit here for 40 years until I'm done working, and then when I'm 60, I'm going to pull that money out and it's going to be more than it was before. That's all compounding is, right? Like that's a concept that we all know is fact, right? So all you do for generational wealth is that you make the time longer, right? So if you put away $1,000 in a compounding safe security, for 60 years, right? So like if you do like a treasury bond, for 60 years, and then you do what's called a 100% dividend reinvestment program. So you do a 100% drip, right, on that bond, that everything that comes out of that bond gets reinvested for 60 years. That $1,000 at the end of 60 years, depending on the interest rate, could be $250,000. Right now, if you started with $10,000, then you might have $2-3 million at the end of the 60 years, right? But that's all it takes. All it takes for generational wealth is compounding, right? And so your generational wealth plan cannot be attached to your wealth plan or it won't work. It has to be a certain amount of money. Now you can make monthly payments to it as well, right? Like you can pay into your generational wealth every month. The thing is, hey, Jay Rivera, the larger the amount you start at is, the better the compounding is going to be. So yes, you can still make it better, right, by making payments to it, but you don't necessarily have to. We had somebody just recently, actually, one of our most recent clients. So it hasn't started like doubling yet, but they got what did they get? Not a structured settlement. They got a settlement, and I think it was a slip and fall type of settlement, whatever. It wasn't a whole lot of money. They got like $32,000 in a settlement type of thing, right? And they just took $10,000 and started their generational wealth, and partied with the other 22 or did whatever they wanted to do with the other 22,000. And that's it. And they got in at a really solid interest rate. So like every 4 years, that money is going to double. because that's just how compounding works. So that's what the rule of 72 is. You take that interest rate times 72, and it'll let you know how many years it takes for that money to double, essentially. So, every 4 years, that's going to double for them. So they put 10 in 4 years, they're going to have 20. 4 years after that, 40. 4 years after that, 80. 4 years after that, 160, right? And so that's how it works. And that's not 60 years. We ain't get to 60 years yet, right? That was like 40 years, right? And then we hit six figures. And then 4 years after 160, what's that? 320, right? So the bigger the number gets, every doubling becomes more and more massive, right? So what ends up happening is by 60, you can see that at 44 years, that's already $320,000, right? What's the next doubling? 640, right? So that's 48 years. Still not at 60 years yet, right? And we're over $500,000. See how it works? So it's ridiculously simple to do generational wealth. It just doesn't benefit you. And a lot of people got to look at themselves in the mirror because that's the reason why they don't do it. They want to do something that they can spend the money at the expense of the next generation and the generation after that, which is crazy. And so they got to figure out what that's about. Why would they rather their children suffer so that they can, try to have some kind of weird come up when they can put a relatively small amount of money to the side and let that compound over the next 6 years or 60 years and guarantee their children or their grandchildren $1 million in prosperity from day one. And couple that with the right education, and those people will do the same thing. So there's something's off, if we can't see that. And it's not an individual deficit. It's not an individual problem. It's a social deficit. We're not taught to think that way. We don't come up thinking that way. And that's why the family constitution is so important, because it reprograms the way our family and our family descendants are trained to think. Good. Yeah, yeah. Happy that makes sense to you. All right. So, any other questions? If there are none, I'm going to wrap it up. All right. Looks like everybody got the answers they wanted. Good to see you, Jay Rivera. Thanks for hanging out. All right. All right. Looks good. Thanks, guys, for hanging out with me. I'm going to go ahead and end the live, and should see you tomorrow.